The moon bled silver over the towers of Lunaris Castle, staining the forgotten gardens where no children played anymore. Wind carried the scent of jasmine and ancient ash, and through the empty corridors only the footsteps of an Omega echoed against stones that guarded generations of secrets. She had no name among the nobles, just the caretaker. But her heart pulsed with songs her mother taught her before departing, melodies that calmed even the wildest wolves of the forest. That night, when she crossed the massive oak door separating the world of the living from the little prince's chamber, she felt for the first time the weight of silence suffocating that place. The boy was curled by the window, violet eyes fixed on the full moon, his tiny fingers clutching a stuffed wolf as if it were the only real thing in a world of shadows. The silence of the wolfless prince. They told her the prince was 5 years old and had no wolf. That during the first moon ceremony, when all royal children awakened their inner beasts and howled to the skies, he only cried. Cried while others ran on 4 legs, cried while parents whispered disappointments, cried until he fell asleep in the queen's lap, who, 3 moons later, would never wake again. The Omega didn't know what to expect when she accepted the position. She needed shelter, food, a place where her own wolf, small and wounded, could rest from persecutions in the southern forests. The court accepted her because Omegas were rare. Their presences calmed even the most violent alphas, and because no one else wanted to care for the defective heir. She approached slowly, her bare feet barely making sound on the red carpet embroidered with ancestral wolves. The prince didn't turn, but his body stiffened slightly. She could sense the fear emanating from him, acrid and familiar, the same fear she carried when alphas looked at her as if she were less than nothing. "May I sit?" Her voice was soft, neither command nor plea, just offering. The boy didn't answer, but didn't retreat either. She interpreted this as permission and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall below the window. She didn't touch him, didn't invade his space, just stayed there, breathing the same air heavy with moonlight and loneliness. Minutes passed. The moon climbed higher, almost reaching the apex of the sky. She could hear guards changing shifts 3 floors below, could smell roasted meat coming from the kitchens, could hear muffled laughter from drunken nobles in the main hall. But there, in that room, time seemed suspended. Then she began to sing. It wasn't a real song, had no words that made sense in any known language. It was something older, something that came from the depths of her soul, where her wolf slept curled, wounded but not broken. It was the song her mother sang when storms came, when hunters passed too close, when the outside world became too wild. The melody flowed from her like water, low and high at once, full of curves and falls that resembled wind in trees and river over stones. It wasn't sad, but carried a melancholy that acknowledged pain without surrendering to it. It was the song of those who survived, who lost, who still chose to rise the next day. The prince moved, slightly, just turning his head, but enough for her to see his profile illuminated by moonlight. He had eyes too large for his small face, long lashes casting delicate shadows on his cheeks, and a thin scar on his left eyebrow she didn't expect to find on someone so young and so protected. She continued singing, letting the melody extend, fold, intertwine, with the moonlight entering through the window. Without realizing, she began adding words, fragments of ancient stories about wolves who lost their way and found new destinies, about moons that wept for the lonely, about children who didn't need claws to be strong. When she finished, the silence that returned was different, softer, less suffocating. "Will you come back tomorrow?" The prince's voice was hoarse from disuse, so low she almost didn't hear. "Yes." "Will you sing again?" "If you want." He nodded, so briefly it could have been imagination, and returned to looking at the moon. But his shoulders weren't so tense anymore, and his fingers loosened slightly the grip on the stuffed wolf. She stayed a few more minutes just to be sure, then stood silently and left. When the door closed behind her, she leaned against it for a moment, closing her eyes. Her wolf stirred inside her, curious, and she felt something strange, not pity for the boy, but recognition, as if looking into a mirror distorted by time. Songs of midnight. The nights became ritual. She arrived when stars began appearing, found the prince always in the same place, always looking outside, and sat on the floor to sing. Sometimes he remained turned toward the window, other times he slowly rotated until facing her, and on one particularly silent night, he sat beside her, at a respectful distance. But there, no one at court spoke to her beyond necessity. Servants avoided her gaze, guards ignored her, nobles pretended she didn't exist. Only the head counselor, a grizzled alpha with predator eyes, watched her with an intensity that made her wolf growl softly. "The prince eats now," he said one morning, blocking her path in the gardens. "Before, he refused food. You're doing your job." It wasn't a compliment, she realized. It was a clinical observation, as if she were a tool functioning as expected. "He's a lonely child," she responded calmly. "He just needs someone who doesn't see him as a mistake." The alpha's eyes narrowed. "Careful with your words, Omega. The prince is a mistake, and everyone knows it. An heir without a wolf is a curse to the kingdom. If he weren't the last of the Lunaris bloodline, he would have already been resolved." Ice ran down her spine, but she kept her face neutral. "I'll continue doing my job." "Yes, you will." He approached, so close she could smell his scent of leather and bitter spices. "But remember, you're here to keep him alive and quiet, not to give hopes that cannot exist. A prince without a wolf will never be king, will never be anything but shame." He walked away, leaving her trembling with contained rage. That night when she sang, her voice carried more fury than melancholy. The prince noticed. She saw it in how he tilted his head, how his eyebrows furrowed slightly. "You're angry," he said when she stopped to breathe. She hesitated. Should she lie, protect him from cruel truth, or treat him with the honesty no one else offered? "I am," she admitted softly. "I'm angry at people who don't understand that strength comes in many forms. But they say I'm weak. They're wrong." He looked at her directly for the first time, those violet eyes too penetrating to belong to a child. "How do you know?" "Because you wake up every day in a place that rejects you, and you still keep breathing. That's the rarest strength there is." Something changed in his face, a small crack in the mask of indifference he wore. For a moment, she saw not a prince, but just a frightened boy who wanted to believe he wasn't broken. "Sing the one about the mountain wolf," he requested quietly, and she sang, feeling her wolf stir, feeling something grow between them, a connection thin as silk thread, but shining when moonlight touched it. Secrets whispered to moonlight. 2 moons passed. The prince now spoke more, small phrases here and there, questions about stories in her songs, observations about ravens visiting his window. He told her his name was Kale, but no one called him that since the queen died. It was always Prince or Young Lord or simply heavy silence. "I had a name before too," she revealed one night when rain beat against the window panes. "Lyra. My mother called me Little Moonbird." "Why did you stop using it?" "Because when you're Omega, your name doesn't matter. You're just your designation, your function." Kyle stayed silent for a long moment. "I'll call you Lyra. Can you call me Kale?" Something tightened in her chest, warm and painful. "When we're alone?" "Yes." He smiled. It was small, hesitant, but it was real, and she felt as if she'd seen the sun rise for the first time. The songs evolved. She began teaching some to him. Simple melodies he repeated with childish but surprisingly tuned voice. He had natural talent, noticed nuances that took her years to master. And when they sang together, something magical happened. Their voices intertwined perfectly, as if made to harmonize. One night, he fell asleep with his head on her shoulder. It was the first time he voluntarily touched her, and she stayed completely still, barely breathing, afraid to break that fragile moment of trust. Her wolf purred softly, protective, and she allowed herself to feel something dangerous, true affection for this boy the world had discarded. She carried him to bed, covered him carefully, and was leaving when he mumbled, half asleep, "Don't go. The nightmares come when you leave." So she stayed, sitting in an armchair near the bed, humming softly until his breathing calmed completely. In following days, she discovered more about his life. How he spent hours in the library, reading everything about wolves and transformations, searching for answers about why he was different. How he tried to force himself to change during full moons, cutting his palms until they bled, believing pain would bring his beast to the surface. How he heard nobles planning to marry him to any alpha strong enough to compensate for his weakness as soon as he came of age. "They talk as if I'm not there," he said one afternoon when she found him in the empty library. "As if I were a problem to be solved. You're a person, Kale, not a problem. But if I never have a wolf, then you'll be a different king, one who understands what it's like to be excluded, to be judged. That could make you better than any violent alpha who rules only by force." He looked at her with those two old eyes. "Do you really believe that?" "With every fiber of my being." The moon that revealed everything. The full moon arrived as it always arrived, implacable, inevitable, bathing the world in ghostly silver. Lyra felt restlessness in her wolf days before, an agitation that grew as the moon gained shape in the sky. Something was different this time. The air smelled of ancient magic, the kind that preceded great changes. Kale was more tense too. She found him in the chamber, but this time he wasn't looking out the window. He was curled in a corner, hugging his knees, and she could feel waves of anxiety emanating from him. "It's going to happen again," he whispered. "They'll all transform, and I'll stay here, alone, with nothing." She knelt in front of him, taking his small, cold hands. "You're not alone. I'm here. But you're Omega, yes. And my wolf is small and scared, nothing like the beasts alphas have. But she's mine. And she's real." Kyle lifted his eyes, tears shining in them. "I feel something sometimes, like there's something inside me, but so deep I can't reach it. Maybe it's not meant to be reached. Maybe it's meant to be accepted." Outside, the howls began. The entire court transformed. Hundreds of wolves running through gardens, celebrating the moon in its maximum glory. The sound was deafening, wild, and Lyra felt her own wolf pull, wanting to join the pack. But she stayed, holding Kale's hands, singing quietly to muffle the sounds that hurt him. And then it happened. The moon reached its apex, aligning perfectly with the chamber window. A ray of silver light, brighter than any normal moonlight, pierced through the glass and bathed them both. Lyra felt sudden, intense heat in her left wrist, as if someone had pressed red-hot iron against her skin. She let out a muffled scream, and Kyle did the same. When the light diminished, both looked at their wrists and saw the same mark, a lunar crescent intertwined with a thorned rose, glowing with its own light, pulsing in sync with their heartbeats. "What?" Kyle began, touching the mark with trembling fingers. Lyra knew what it was. She'd heard the legends, the stories old Omegas whispered about bonds transcending designations, about souls finding each other through time and space. But this was impossible. He was a child. She was his caretaker. And more than that, he was Prince. She was Omega. The world wouldn't allow it. "It's the moon bond," she whispered, horror and wonder mixed in her voice. "My mother spoke of this. When two souls are destined to be connected, the moon marks them. But Kale, you're too young. This shouldn't—" "It hurts," he said, but didn't seem to be complaining. His eyes were wide, fixed on the mark. "But also, doesn't hurt. It's strange. I can feel you, like you're inside my head." She could feel it too, an invisible line connecting them, pulsing with each emotion, each thought. She felt his fear, but also wonder, and he probably felt her panic, confusion. "No one can know," she said quickly, covering her mark with the sleeve. "Kyle, do you understand? If they find out, they'll say it's an abomination. They'll kill me and isolate you even more." He covered his own mark, nodding gravely. already so used to keeping secrets, to hiding parts of himself. But something had changed irrevocably. When she looked at him now, she didn't see just a lonely boy she cared for. She saw something more, something the moon had declared, something that frightened and attracted at the same time. The weight of forbidden destiny. The following days were the hardest of her life. The mark burned constantly, reminding her of something she couldn't have, of a destiny that made no sense. She tried researching in ancient library books, hoping to find some explanation, some way to undo the bond. What she found was worse. Moon bonds were rare, perhaps one every 1,000 years. They were considered sacred by the ancients, signs that two souls were created as perfect complements, but history showed they were also tragic. Most ended in death, because the world rarely accepted connections that defied established hierarchies. And there was something more disturbing. The books mentioned bonds could manifest years before becoming complete, that the moon sometimes marked souls when one was still young, creating a connection that would mature with time. This didn't make things better. It just meant she'd have to guard this secret for years, watching him grow, feeling the bond deepen, knowing that when he reached adulthood, the court would never accept. Kyle was changing too. She noticed in small things, how he became more confident, how he spoke more during lessons with tutors, how his posture was no longer so curved. It was as if the bond gave him something he always needed, absolute certainty that someone truly saw him. But he also asked questions, questions she didn't know how to answer. "Why did the moon choose us?" he asked one night, tracing the hidden mark under his sleeve. "I don't know. The stories say bonds are forever, that people can't live without each other after being marked. They're just stories, Kyle. You feel when I'm sad, even when I'm not here." It was true. She felt it, felt every strong emotion he had, like waves crossing the distance between them, and she suspected he felt hers too. "The bond connects us," she admitted carefully, "but that doesn't mean we understand what it means. You're still young. Maybe when you grow up, maybe what? Maybe it'll disappear." She didn't answer because the truth was that books said otherwise. Bonds only deepened with time. The storm approaches. The head counselor began watching them more closely. Lyra felt his heavy gaze during meals, in corridors, when she went to Kyle's chamber. He said nothing, but tension increased. Then, one winter morning, when snow covered the gardens and transformed the castle into a white mausoleum, he summoned her. "The prince has improved under your care," he began, sitting behind an enormous desk in an office that smelled of old leather and domination. "That's remarkable." "He just needed company," she responded, keeping her voice calm despite growing fear. "Omega company, you mean?" His eyes were sharp, dissecting every reaction. "There are rumors you sing to him, that he calls you by name, that an inappropriate attachment is developing." Her blood froze. "I care for him, as is my duty. Your duty is to keep him alive and controlled, not to create emotional dependencies that will complicate court plans for his future. He's a child who lost his mother. Compassion isn't a crime." The Alpha stood, circling the desk like a predator. "Listen well, Omega. In 3 years, the prince will reach his majority. At that moment, he'll be married to the Blood Moon clan's daughter, a strong Alpha who can compensate for his deficiencies. This marriage is crucial to maintaining alliances. Anything threatening these plans will be eliminated. Understand?" The message was clear. She was expendable, disposable, an easily removed obstacle. "I understand," she forced the words. "Good. Continue your work, but remember your place." She left trembling, the mark on her wrist burning as if sensing the threat. When she arrived at Kyle's chamber that night, he noticed immediately. "What happened?" he asked, genuine concern in his young eyes. She couldn't lie. The bond wouldn't allow it. "They want to marry you when you grow up, to someone strong, someone to compensate for you not having a wolf." The pain that crossed his face broke her heart. "I knew," he whispered. I always knew that would happen. Kale, but I don't want to. Don't want to marry someone who sees me as a defect to be corrected. His eyes met hers, so intense. I want someone who sings with me on moon nights. She couldn't breathe. He wasn't saying what she thought he was. Couldn't be. He was too young to understand. But the bond pulsed between them, warm and inevitable, and she knew he understood more than he should. When the world discovers. They tried to be more careful. Lyra kept distance during the day, only fulfilling basic duties. Nightly songs became shorter, more mechanical, but the bond couldn't be hidden from their own bodies. Their marks glowed brighter during full moons, and it became increasingly difficult to disguise how they gravitated toward each other. It was a servant who denounced them, an envious beta who noticed how Lyra's sleeves always covered her left wrist, who saw the sudden glow beneath fabric during a particularly powerful moon, who spied through the cracked door and saw Kale showing his own mark to Lyra, saw how they compared them, how they glowed in synchrony. The court exploded. Lyra was dragged from the chamber the next morning, chained with silver that burned her skin. Alpha guards took her to the main hall, where all nobles were gathered, their eyes full of horror and revulsion. An Omega! The head counselor spat the word like poison, dared create a forbidden bond with our prince, an abomination against nature, against the hierarchy that keeps our kingdom in order. It wasn't our choice, Lyra said, her voice coming out stronger than expected. The moon marked us. We didn't ask. Silence! An alpha she didn't know advanced, slamming his fist on the table. Bonds are manipulated by experienced Omegas. You seduced an innocent child, planted your mark on him through dirty magic. That's not true. Burn her, someone shouted. Burn the Omega and the bond will die. Others agreed, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of hatred. Lyra felt her world collapse. She was going to die, and Kyle, what would they do to him? Then the door burst open. Kale entered the hall, and everyone fell silent. He wore formal clothes. The small crown he rarely put on was on his head, and his violet eyes burned with determination she'd never seen before. "Release her," he ordered, his childish voice but carrying authority born of desperation. "Young lord, return to your chambers," the head counselor said with false gentleness. "This doesn't... Release her now." Kyle walked to the hall's center, raising his left wrist, showing the moon mark glowing with its own light. The moon marked us. It wasn't her choice, nor mine. It was destiny, and you cannot burn what the gods decided. You're a child who was manipulated. "I know what I am." For the first time in his life, Kyle shouted. "I know you see me as failure, as shame. But this mark," he pointed to his wrist, "is the first thing in my entire life that makes sense. The first thing that says I belong somewhere. And if you hurt her, if you kill her, I'll ensure there's never an heir for this court. I'll choose death before marrying anyone you choose." The silence was absolute. The head counselor looked ready to have an attack. "You cannot. This is treason." "It's the truth." Kyle approached Lyra, standing between her and the nobles. "She's mine. The moon said so. And even you, with all your power, cannot undo what the moon did." The flight in darkness. They imprisoned her in the dungeons but didn't kill her. Kyle's ultimatum worked. As much as they hated him, he was the last Lunaris, and the bloodline couldn't end. But they also couldn't allow him to stay with a marked Omega. The solution was simple and brutal. Keep them separated until they found a way to break the bond, or until Kale married as planned, creating a conjugal bond that would overwrite the moon mark. In the dungeons, Lyra withered. Not from lack of food or water, but because the bond hurt when they were separated. It was as if someone had tied a thread around her heart and constantly pulled it. She could feel Kale too, feel his pain, his anger, his crushing sadness. One night, when the moon was new and darkness was absolute, someone unlocked her cell. It was Kyle. He looked different, thinner, with deep shadows under his eyes, but his eyes shone with fierce determination. "How did you..." she began. "I stole the guard's keys. We have to go, now." "Kyle, this is madness. If they catch us." "Then they catch us. I'd rather try and fail than stay here feeling you die slowly." He held her hand, and the touch was like electricity, the bond singing with relief. "Trust me, please." She trusted him more than anyone alive. They fled through secret tunnels Kyle discovered in ancient library maps. Guards didn't expect a submissive, wolfless prince to try escaping, so patrols were loose. They exited through back gates, entering the forest surrounding the castle, the same forest where Lyra once hid from hunters. The alarm sounded when the sun began rising. Howls from hundreds of wolves echoed through trees, pursuing, hunting. Lyra picked up Kale and ran, her wolf finally emerging, small and grey but fast. "Climb!" she ordered, and he obeyed, gripping her fur as she ran faster than she'd ever run. But it wasn't enough. Pursuers were experienced alphas, enormous and powerful wolves. They'd catch them in minutes. Then Kyle did something unexpected. He sang. He began with the melody she taught him the first night, that ancient wordless song. But he changed it, made it wilder, stronger, and his voice, even trembling with fear, carried power. And the forest responded. Trees bent, forming barriers. Roots emerged from the ground, tripping pursuers. Ravens descended in black clouds, confusing wolves. The earth itself seemed to protect them. Lyra felt tears in her eyes as she ran. He had magic, always had. It wasn't wolf, but something older, rarer. He was song-born, a legend she thought was just story. Revelation, under the rising moon. They ran for 3 days and 3 nights, stopping only when they could move no more. Lyra returned to human form, and both collapsed exhausted in a hidden clearing, surrounded by ancient stones, humming with protective magic. "How did you do that?" she asked when she recovered her breath. Kyle looked at his own hands, amazed. "I don't know. I felt you singing in my blood and something just awakened." "You're not wolfless," she whispered. "You're something they never understood. Songborn, someone who speaks to the earth itself. But the books say Songborn are legend, and moonbonds too. But here we are." He smiled, and it was the first time she saw true happiness in his face. Not the fragile happiness of a stolen moment, but something solid, real. "We can't go back," he said. It wasn't a question. "No. So what do we do?" Lyra looked at the surrounding forest, at stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky, at the mark glowing on both wrists. "We live," she said simply. "We learn. And when you're old enough, if you still want, we return not as fugitives, but as something they cannot ignore." "Like what?" "Like the true Lunaris heir. The one who doesn't need wolf, because he has something rarer. The one the moon chose not just to rule, but to transform everything." The moon began rising, large and bright. Kyle extended his hand, and she took it, feeling the bond pulse between them. No longer a burden, but a promise. They sang together that night, their voices intertwining with moonlight, and the forest sang with them. Somewhere distant, the court continued its search. But there, in that moment, they were just 2 souls marked by the moon, finally free to discover what that truly meant.